From the job site to the code book, this is a Pool Envy podcast where licensed pool professionals speak up. Code, compliance, craftsmanship. Hosted by Jason Davies. Licensed across Wisconsin, Florida, and Texas. Your deep end starts now.
Every homeowner consultation usually results in some permutation of one simple request. I just want it done right. And honestly, that's an exceptionally reasonable expectation. The problem is that done right means something different to almost everyone involved in a project. Ask 10 people what a successful project looks like, and you'll probably receive 10 different answers. Ask 10 strangers on the internet, and you'll get 20 more answers, 3 arguments, and somehow feel less certain than when you started. The homeowner has an answer. The builder has an answer. The electrician has an answer. The tile installer has an answer. The plaster crew has an answer. The inspector has an answer. The manufacturer has an answer. The consultant has an answer. None of them are necessarily wrong. They're just not necessarily the same. And that's where problems begin. People are incredibly good at imagining outcomes. The beautiful backyard, the finished pool, the clear water, the perfect tile, the completed project. What they're not always good at is defining the process that creates those outcomes. A desired outcome is not the same thing as a defined outcome. I've seen projects where tile came loose because the waterproofing detail that was obvious to one trade was never part of another trade's scope. I've seen projects where equipment wasn't installed as expected. Projects where startup procedures became disputed years later. Projects where everyone involved genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. Very few failures begin with someone intentionally doing something wrong. Many begin with assumptions. Assumptions that were never challenged. Assumptions that were never documented. Assumptions that quietly became decisions. And once those decisions are buried behind concrete, plaster, tile, decking, equipment, drywall, paint, or paperwork, they become very expensive to revisit. Another thing I've learned is that the common practice and the best practice are not always the same thing. Sometimes they're identical, sometimes they're years apart. And if the outcome isn't clearly defined, people often default to whatever they've always done. Not because they're malicious, not because they're incompetent, because people are busy. Schedules matter, budgets matter, subcontractors change, materials change, projects evolve. The path of least resistance often wins. That's why expectations matter. That's why standards matter. That's why documentation matters. Not because we're planning for a dispute. Not because we're expecting failure. But because memories fade. Companies change. People move. Years pass. The documentation remains. One of the most expensive phrases in construction is, "I thought that was included." Another expensive phrase is, "I thought somebody checked that." And perhaps the most expensive phrase of all, "I thought it was done right." Because if nobody ever defined what right meant, there was never a realistic outcome to begin with. There was only an outcome. So before your next project, before the first shovel hits the ground, before the first piece of equipment is installed, before the first check is written, ask one simple question. What does success look like? Not generally, not emotionally, specifically. How will we know this project was successful when it's finished? Write that down. Because if success isn't defined, failure can't be measured. And if there isn't a specific outcome, there isn't a realistic outcome. There is only the outcome that happened. I'm Jason Davies with Pool Envy. Until next time, remember, done right is not a specification. Define the outcome before the work begins.
This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not legal advice, and it is not site-specific engineering, code, or safety determination. All field conditions should be evaluated in context. Thanks for listening to the Pool Envy Podcast, where licensed pool professionals speak up. Hosted by Jason Davies, licensed across Wisconsin, Florida, and Texas. For more insights, subscribe and join us next time.